It's BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Halloween episode. I think something's a little bit off with the picture. There you can see me a little bit more in the more or less full screen. Happy Halloween, by the way. It is Halloween night here in the Philippines, but Halloween morning to you guys. And firstly, thank you for choosing to spend part of your Halloween with me, no matter what time you're listening to this from around the globe. So, firstly, I would like to actually let's see if I can tune one thing here. Hey, Swedish Chef has a comment here. Probably won't make it to the live stream, so wishing Ned and all happy Halloween and a blessed Samhain. Swedish Chef, thank you so much. Happy Halloween. Libius, hello. Hey, how you guys doing? This is one of the first Halloween nights in a long time that I have not had any type of costume or of any sort. And one of the big reasons is, as I said in some previous episodes, Halloween isn't very popular here in the Philippines, and they have a lot of masks and such. But last year, I was a spider for Halloween. That was the easiest costume in the world. It's just kind of like some stick on things to turn yourself into a spider. But I love dressing up, but I particularly like to use those things with grease makeup where you can. I love how you look like you're a different character, but you still look like yourself. And I didn't want to just buy 50-cent plastic mask and so on. But anyway, happy Halloween to all of you guys, no matter where you're coming from. So, because it is October and it's Halloween night, I wanted to talk about horror films. If anybody has any recommendations, they can put them in the chat. Firstly, I've been trying my best to keep up with horror movies this October season, and one of them I saw was called The Bride in the Box, available here on YouTube for free, of course. And it was actually a pretty good movie. Like, one of the things I look for with films is number one, is it engaging? Like, do I constantly want to know what is happening? Are my eyes just fixated on the screen like a laser beam? Hey, Ross, hello, hello. And I want to know, am I able to just completely focus and get into the world of the movie? And with The Bride in the Box, that was definitely possible. But one of the things about it was, it's like a supernatural horror film. And I didn't think that the horror elements or the supernatural elements really helped that much. They had really good characters. And I was thinking the whole time, if they had just made a drama about these characters, like took away the horror story, took away the paranormal story, and just put in about this family that's having some type of internal dispute and real world family problems, they might have had a better movie. Another horror movie that I watched this year was The House on Pine Street. And it was, again, a very engaging movie. You definitely wanted to know what happened. It's a supernatural movie, paranormal, something that's a little bit out of this world. But I can't tell you what it is without giving away the ending. And I do not like to give away movie spoilers. But I was watching that all the way to the end, and once they actually reveal like the surprise ending that comes with the finale, I was kind of left with this underwhelming experience where I was just thinking, it kind of could have been better. It's like going. Oh, that's where we end up. But I'm curious, what horror movies do you guys like? What do you like to hear about? Another one that I watched was called The Cabin, also available here on YouTube for free. All of these movies are on YouTube for free. And Ross says the John Carpenter trilogy. John Carpenter is amazing. I mean, not only for Halloween, but for his other films too. And Simon says, I think Zodiac was somewhat living through pulp comics, most likely. But with John Carpenter, I mean, the Halloween franchise is amazing. I've seen every single one of them. Halloween from 2018 was all right. Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends, not all right. Sorry about that. But I saw this movie called The Cabin, which was kind of like a slasher film, and it was reasonably well done, but they could have had so many more scares in that. And part of me was thinking, I do this channel where I talk to you guys about true crime cases and all, and we're talking about unsolved mysteries. But I was like, what if I had put my energy into horror movies? I mean, do you ever have that experience when, like, say, for example, you're watching a movie, you're like, I could do better than these jerks. And before you think that that's an arrogant statement, let me remind you that there was once a video store clerk named Quentin Tarantino who was always looking at the new releases and the new movies, and he's just thinking, I don't like these new films. I'm going to write my own movie. So he wrote the screenplay for Reservoir Dogs. It can be done. But I mean, sometimes people are trying to find a blend of things that are going to be kind of suitable for a PG-13 audience and also suitable for people that want to be scared shitless. And part of me is like, we just need something that's going to be a little bit extreme. Now, also on the note of horror films, somebody posted this challenge question today. If you could choose 5 characters from horror movies to be on your team, meaning just a team that's going to win, like if you could choose 5 characters to be on your team from any horror movie, who would you choose? And I really had to think for a second. And I was like, obviously, Michael Myers. I said I love John Carpenter, Halloween, all of that. Next, I said Jigsaw because Michael Myers is all about like brute force and he's strong and he's cunning. But you want Jigsaw from the Saw movies because he's smart, methodical, and calculating. But if you're going to have somebody who is methodical and calculating, why not Hannibal Lecter? Now, a lot of people don't think the Hannibal Lecter movies are even horror. Maybe they're not, maybe they are. But what the thing about Hannibal Lecter is The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, Red Dragon, and the prequels is that Hannibal Lecter can kill people, which he did in the films, but he also has the ability to convince other people to kill themselves. He was once rated as the best movie villain ever because he can psychologically twist people to commit suicide. Definitely a very capable villain. And one of the choices on this massive horror list, which is just a collage of images, was Ghostface. Ghostface from the Scream movies. Absolutely, I want Ghostface on my team because the Ghostface is like a different person in every movie. Sorry if I ruined that franchise for you. No, I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Not from Scary Movie at all. That stuff's amazingly wonderful. Anna Faris, she's a delight. But yes, I would want Ghostface. Now, the 5th one, another very good character. I'm very much undecided because the real life villain, the Zodiac, because he won't be caught. Ross, how perfect is that? Yeah, okay. I was going to save some Zodiac killer stuff for later on, but I'm going to share something with you guys right now. I asked everyone. Oh, Julian's here. Hey, good morning, Julian. Happy Halloween. So I asked you guys a challenge question. I'm doing a new interview series on this channel. I'm bringing guests on the program. And I said, who do you guys want to hear? And I have to give a shout out to Steve, who gave the response. He said, my dream is for Ned to interview the Zodiac killer. Yes, of course I want to do that. Now, I recognize that the Zodiac killer was a terrible person. He was a murderous scumbag. Everything that he did was wrong. But I have to be completely honest with you. Let's say hypothetically the Zodiac killer were caught and he's in prison or something wearing like the orange jumpsuit or maybe one of those red jumpsuits or something like that. And if I would love the opportunity to sit down face to face from the real Zodiac and interview him. Hey, what were you thinking when you did this? What is the secret meaning of the Z13 cipher and the Z32 and all that? Asking those types of questions. Now, of course, I want that opportunity. Should it even be me? There are people who've dealt with this material a lot longer than I have. People who have followed the Zodiac killer mystery a lot longer than I have. Tom Voigt, Michael Butterfield, Mike Morford, Mike Rodelli. But, oh, Robert Graysmith, how about him? And I think that I'm just going to be honest. Yes, I would want to interview the real Zodiac. Not even just knowing the Zodiac's real identity, but I would want to be the person sitting in the jailhouse conducting that interview, getting to ask my questions. So that's shout out to Steve. Good idea. But on the Halloween notion, can I share something with you guys? One of my favorite baseball players is Dylan Cease from the Chicago White Sox. And they asked him, what Halloween candy do you dislike the most? And he I couldn't remember the name. He's like, oh, I got to pull up my phone. What the thing is? What is that thing called or something? And he's from Georgia. Yeah, he does talk like that. I don't know. It sounds almost identical to my West Virginian voice. And it's more just like Tootsie Rolls. That's what he was trying to remember. Tootsie Rolls. That's the Halloween candy that he dislikes the most. Now, as I said, he's one of my favorite baseball players. How can you dislike Tootsie Rolls? I mean, seriously, how can you dislike Tootsie Rolls? Also, though, there was this meme on Facebook that rated all of the different Halloween candies by which state has their the most popular Halloween candy for each state. In Alaska, their most popular candy is the haichu. Haichus. I did not try haichus until I was 34 years old. Yeesh. Those things are amazing. Those Alaskans know what they're talking about. Ross says, Professor Horn blew my mind with the there was no Zodiac theory. Well, this is something that's been going on for a while now because it's not only with the Zodiac case, there's also the Jack the Ripper case. It also has there was no Jack the Ripper hoax theory. And the Zodiac hoax theory is very similar to that. And, I get a lot of requests to talk about that one. Julian says, I love the fruit flavored Tootsie Rolls a lot. Yeah, like I remember them as a kid more than an adult. Like I was eating it was either blueberry or something like that, or might have had blue paper, or had some type of like vanilla cream in them. But those things were really good. Now, because this is just a Halloween episode and general chat episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about a post that I had made on the Black Box Online Radio YouTube channel, which I'm going to be pulling up right here. And I was just asking you guys in the comments section, what do you want to hear about? Like, other than true crime, what do you guys like to discuss? What would you want to, what subjects do you just follow on YouTube? I mean, because, we can go through anything, and I put up some things like some choices, but really, I love what you guys said in the comments section down below. Mr. JSV650 says, I guess history and true crime are a grouping. Looking forward to the Halloween special, Ned. Right on right now. Thanks for putting up your book on YouTube. I've enjoyed it so far. Yes, my book is actually coming out on the weekends. I wrote a novel called Killer on a White Horse. I'm releasing the audiobook for free on YouTube. You can tune in on the weekends. There's also a playlist made available for Killer on a White Horse. You can just listen to the audiobook if you want something to listen to. And if you want to follow along with all of these discussions, please hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Absolutely free ways to support the channel. BF Golf says that BF Golf wants to hear about any sort of mysteries, sports, and some type of entertainment stuff. Anyone that's on this channel might like the Missing Enigma channel. He's the best missing persons channel on YouTube, in my opinion. Okay, so you see, with missing persons cases, there have been a lot of requests to talk about more missing persons cases, and I only really talk about them here if they're very well covered in the news, because missing persons cases get back to the family very easily. And I've had several times when I've been theorizing and saying what I genuinely think about a case, and I get contacted by a family member and they say, hey, that's my family, what you're talking about. I think that that's an insensitive thing to say. And I'm like, whoa, excuse me. I didn't mean anything by that. And ultimately, I end up taking down the episode. I mean, that's happened more than once, actually. But, well, see, Ross says he wants to hear about the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. That was one of the episodes I had to take down because somebody provided this information to me about saying that he thought that he had identified Andrew Gosden. And I didn't even say the full name. I said half of the name. I think Andrew Gosden's living under this name somewhere else. I only said half the name. And somebody was able to track down that person's profile and they contacted them. And then that person wrote to me and said, hey, look, I know you were just making an episode. You thought that you were talking about information that was true, but that's me that you were talking about in the episode. I'm not Andrew Gosden. And a lot of the info that was shared to you is fabricated, such as like some story about how he didn't have a passport. He wasn't able to set up his internet connection in the UK, something like that. He's like, please take down your episode. I was like, I apologize. And he was very polite with me. He just said that it's not true. So, you see what I mean about missing persons cases. However, something like the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, I used to talk about it all the time. I did an 8-part response series to the Netflix miniseries on Madeleine McCann. My response series was called New Challenges. Ross says, holy mackerel. I was shocked too. I didn't even reveal the guy's name or anything. And, I mean, I said half of it, and somebody could put 2 and 2 together, and they went looking through social media profiles, and they found the guy, and he contacted me at my email address. But Ghost Gaming says, I enjoy history and mysterious cases mainly. Yes, I do too, and I've talked about getting into more historical mysteries. You want to talk about history, though? I just learned about a serial killer named Arthur William Hodge. He was a colonial serial killer, like from the colonial era, from the British Empire and the British Virgin Islands. And he was sentenced to death by hanging because he murdered his own slaves. He murdered as many as 60 of his own slaves by torturous methods. We're talking about like pouring boiling water down people's throats. I mean, even he took a 10-year-old boy and put him into boiling alcohol to kill him. And as I said, he murdered 60 of his own slaves, very torturous individual. And they just refer to him as a sick, demented mind. And sometimes I just have these moments when I'm like, what is wrong with humanity? I know I explore this stuff every single week here on Black Box Online Radio, but I'm just like, it comes to a certain point when everything is just completely shocking to you that you find these things time and time again. And it's not isolated. Those are not isolated incidents. The reason why I encountered the story of Arthur William Hodge at all is because I was reading about a different serial killer named Henry Hodges. Were you guys familiar with the show Lockup? Lockup was a program that was on MSNBC in like marathon fashion. Every Saturday or Sunday, whenever it was, they would do marathons of Lockup. And I remember the clip of an individual named Henry Hodges. They said he was the most violent serial killer in the prison. Anytime he left his cell, he had to be escorted by 5 different prison guards. And the reason why was because he was just extremely dangerous. One of them had to hold a video camera to show any evidence, like if they used force against him, the reason why they were using force. And I'm against the death penalty, mind you. But when I hear stories like that, it challenges my stance on things because, like someone is so dangerous, they have to be escorted by 5 prison guards at all time. It's rather crazy. And Richard says the disappearance of Lord Lucan. Am I seeing that right? Something might be blocking the screen. I haven't heard of that one actually, Richard. But good morning, Richard Grinnell. Good evening to you, perhaps in the UK, and happy Halloween. And as far as Henry Hodges goes, I was looking for that specific clip from the show Lockup. He was a serial killer, murdered at least 3 people, but he made international news in 2022 because he cut off his own penis and just held it up for the prison guards and said, "Hey, you, eat this." And then there's some different stories. In one story, he slit his wrists, and in other stories, it was just the penis. But the whole point is that there are some just really twisted things that I haven't even encountered in my true crime journeys until right now. But the Black Bill Behemoth says about things that he wants to hear about on this channel. I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, but there's a galaxy of other channels for that. What about doing shows about eerie legends like the Boston clown sightings of 1981 or the Fat Farm of San Antonio in the 90s? The name Fat Farm was the name given to it, not by me. I believe you on that, the Black Pill Behemoth. Yes. Actually, we have a question that comes in from Simon Nelson who says, ever wonder if the Zodiac moved overseas? All the time. Based on how many people have been stationed in the military in different parts of the world, particularly in Japan, Tachikawa Air Force Base, Kadena Air Base. A lot of people get stationed in Germany. Other Zodiac killer suspects are placed over there, such as Louis Myers did 2 years in Germany. Dennis Land also spent time on a German military base. And if you didn't get a chance to watch Drew Beeson's most recent live stream, he was talking a lot about the Golden State Killer and the Zodiac Golden State Killer connection. Somebody in the comment section in the chat was talking about how their Zodiac Killer suspect is Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. And it wasn't Ann Penn, but someone who has a similar belief. And talking about how he was growing up on a military base in Germany, and he actually witnessed the rape of his sister, which heavily, heavily traumatized him. And that was a contributing factor into his psychological development. And that's, of course, before the Zodiac crimes, but the previous ones that I stated were in the midst of Zodiac activity, more or less. As far as conspiracy theories go, would I talk about conspiracy theories on this channel? Yes, absolutely, all the time. The technical ones, the not technical ones, brainwashing by the global elites, all day, every day, because I really find that I believe in a lot of the things about the New World Order, but not in the way that Alex Jones talks about. Back in 2019 and into 2020, I was talking about the New World Order all the time on this channel and the intertwined networks of the global elites. But again, it's not exactly the way that those guys present it. Guys like Alex Jones and the whole InfoWars crowd, they make things appear more outrageous than they actually are. When in reality, a lot of things are a little bit boring. Ross has a question. Have you interviewed anyone who believes the Texarkana Killer and the Zodiac are one and the same? I haven't interviewed them, but Wildfire99 was a regular listener to this program, and he would, of course, write out all of his reasons why he thought the Phantom Killer from Texarkana and the Zodiac were one and the same. David Gold would be somebody that I might bring on the show in the future. David Gold and I have corresponded a little bit, but the problem with David Gold is they wanted to bring him on the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Expert series. He's the author of My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, and he believes that the Zodiac and the Phantom Killer are one and the same, and the Zodiac also went on to be D.B. Cooper. Hey, Cat Daddy Steve, how you doing? But they wanted to bring him on the Interview with the Expert series. David Gold, by his own admission, says that he doesn't learn his things through research. These are experiences that he had, and his Zodiac suspect, Frank Lee Morris, told him all of these things directly. So that's really isn't the fitting in with the show, and I thought that was a little bit different. So I was mostly opposed to that. But on my new interview series here on this channel, we can talk about anybody can come on. Mostly, as I said, unless I think that they're fraudulent, I think that they are they don't have a good grip on reality, or the if they just don't have enough material for the duration of a podcast episode. Simon Nelson has a question. Do you know if the Halloween card came with the skeletons drawn on, or did the Zodiac draw them on? This is my understanding, Simon. I don't believe that either skeleton was drawn on. There was one skeleton that was on the card, on the front flap of the card, like when you open up like the outside cover, and that was already printed on there. Printed. The second skeleton was on the inside of the card, like on the inside of the card, right? And it was a posable novelty skeleton that was pasted on, and it was positioned so it looked like it was hanging from the spider web. Now, Drew Beeson, author of Citing It on the Zodiac Killer, claims that it's possible that skeleton was modified somewhat with hand-drawn markings, but I don't necessarily know if that's true. I haven't heard that corroborated from anyone else, so I think both of the skeletons were already pre-designed, and one of them was pasted on the inside. We have a comment from Rorschach1004 about what do you want to hear about on this channel? Pro wrestling. Are there any pro wrestling fans out there? I had a wrestling match that was recommended to me by the YouTube algorithm, and it was Mankind versus The Rock for the WWE Championship. Might have even been WWF at the time, but for the World Championship, let's just say that. And, Mankind, Mick Foley, he had his very famous match with The Undertaker, Hell in a Cell. He gets thrown off the Hell in the Cell cage. He gets thrown through the Hell in the Cell cage, then choke slammed on the thumbtacks, pile driver. And Ross says, 1980s WWE, sure, absolutely. WWF and WWWF, even back then, right? Was that the 70s? I forget. But I was watching this match, and these guys are just giving their commentary like, showing the abridged version. And there's a forgotten match that just happened on a Monday night where it's Mankind versus The Rock for the world title. And it was just so much blood because Mick Foley was such a hardcore wrestler that they said people thought he could handle anything. And, he was beaten up so badly that he couldn't walk, but they're supposed to kind of like motion him over toward like the ramp that leads off the stage. So The Rock is just hitting him with a steel chair over and over and over again in the head. And by the time the match was over, they tried to put him on a stretcher to take him to the back, and then the blood is literally just spilling out onto the stretcher, coming through the Mankind mask. Mick Foley is definitely a hardcore individual, but notice he doesn't seem to have brain damage. He doesn't seem to have any of the kind of neurological issues that some other wrestlers have. So I don't know if he just got lucky, or perhaps some people are built a little bit differently. Yeah, I love watching the 80s matches too, though, Ross. Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, right? And Andre the Giant was a participant in one of the famous stretcher matches from the 1980s. There's something that's just so entertaining about watching the Giants. Like, not only Andre the Giant, also known as The Big Show, Giant Gonzalez from the 1980s, and he went into the 90s too, right? 90s, yeah. He was El Gigante in WCW, and then he was Giant Gonzalez in WWF, and he had the famous WrestleMania match with The Undertaker, and he knocked The Undertaker out with chloroform, so he was disqualified. That's one of the things that preserved the Undertaker's unbeaten streak for so long. So sad that he lost it to Brock Lesnar. See, like, Brock Lesnar's a very strong fighter, but I just don't like him that much as a WWE persona. Mic skills, Brock. Mic skills. Axecrafter says he wants to hear about guitar building and modeling and repair. I can play a few chords, but I know nothing about guitar building. I know nothing about modeling. I know nothing about repair. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. I mean, thank goodness the strings on those guitars don't break. Kay Shover says that they want to hear about travel. I can talk to you all the time about the Philippines, China. I lived in Russia for 1 year. I lived in North Africa for 6 months. Those places are rough. The Philippines is so chill, unbelievably. Ross says, wasn't there a Zodiac movie from 1971? Yes, it's called The Zodiac Killer. And I did a response to that back in 2019. It's one of those old black box recordings where there's a black box on the screen with the bubbles. With the 1971 Zodiac Killer film, it's done as if the Zodiac were telling the truth, where you actually just have this guy who's the Zodiac, and he's talking to slaves in the afterlife. They made it pretty clear that it's a delusion, like, I am sitting in my chamber. I am talking to my slaves. I can hear the voice of my slave that I will reconnect with when I die and I am reborn in paradise. And I'm talking like a fruit because he was a fruit. He's like, oh, who would ever hurt a rabbit? He's kind of like acting like that and so on. Hey, Mr. JSV, happy Halloween. But, I mean, I see what they were trying to do. They're like, who are we to say that this stuff is false? This is what the Zodiac talked about. Maybe this is what he was like. But that film paid strong attention to show that the Zodiac isn't necessarily the way a lot of people would perceive him to be. They have the Zodiac killer committing the Lake Herman Road murders, wearing like a red jacket and blue jeans and brown shoes. And, before that, I think about the Zodiac wearing all black and such. Who doesn't, right? But there are no witnesses to the Lake Herman Road murders. Who's to say he wasn't wearing a red jacket and blue jeans and brown shoes, just shaking up, fires his gunshots, and walks away? Why not? That's as good as any. Simon says, what are your thoughts on the Zodiac Killer taking inspiration from comics, etc.? Strange that comic characters have their logo on the chest, the same way he did, stitching his on there. Okay, excellent question. And I'm going to be talking a lot about this with my guest who is going to be on the Friday show. But as far as that, it's possible that the Zodiac hood already existed, and that's why the thing was sewn over it, because he was trying to cover up an existing logo. Or Simon could have a solid question. The Zodiac Killer was trying to turn himself into a comic book villain. And to the credit of Neil Arnold, who runs the Just Another Zodiac group on Facebook, he has shared countless images that could have been inspirations for the Zodiac's Lake Berryessa costume. Some people even think that the Zodiac might have been trying to turn himself into a Batman villain. So I think that those are all reasonable observations. The Zodiac was almost certainly a comic book fan, comic book collector, and not only comics, magazines. We're talking books. I'm not necessarily sure if he was somebody who was scatterbrained with ADD, but rather someone who would have been able to get lost in a world of imagination. Somebody who just gets inside his head too much. Not like me, not like you, but in the murderous way when he's like, I have everybody fooled. Everybody thinks I'm harmless. Now, I'm going to unleash a master plan to kill people. But it's not a master plan. He just shot people who were defenseless and couldn't fight back. Richard Grinnell has a question. Do you think the Zodiac Killer letters were a reflection of the killer or a misdirection? In other words, the Zodiac is completely the opposite of the picture he painted. Richard, great question. I think a lot of it was a misdirection. This might not be the most satisfying answer that you want to hear, Richard, but I think the Zodiac was a persona. I think it's a fictional character, like the way that an actor would be acting out a part, or maybe somebody's pretending to be something they're not, and when they're around some people, they act a certain way, and when they're around other people, they don't. I think the Zodiac was putting on a front, a facade. It was fake. He's talking in a fake voice on the phone calls. If you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, you'll find 2 kids in a brown car. stuff like that, like the conversation at Lake Berryessa. All I want's your money. I'm just trying to get to Mexico. I think all of that was fake. I don't think that was the killer's natural voice. I think that he was altering his voice to go with the persona. And even when he's writing the letters, he's like trying to pretend to be the Zodiac. He's not pretending to be himself at all. And I think it's all about making up a story, like the way that a superhero would have a backstory. Superman's from Krypton. Batman lost his parents as a kid. Spider-Man got bitten by the radioactive spider. The Zodiac wants to hunt people for sport because he's like real smart and he wants to die and be reborn in paradise and have slaves. So that is my take on the subject. David Griffin, hey, happy Halloween, David. Do you know the person that does the Nancy Drew Zodiac channel? I would like to see him interviewed. I don't. And somebody wrote out recently in the comment section, it's good that you've connected with the Nancy Drew channel. I'm like, whoa, I have not connected with the Nancy Drew channel at all, other than I've watched some of his videos and I answer questions in his polls. Like, I leave things in the comments section. We've exchanged comments. We've never really had any communication. And absolutely, he would be someone that I would have on the show just to talk about ideas. Again, though, prior to doing that interview, there's something we would have to do. I'd be like, all right, what do you actually believe about the Zodiac? Because if you watch some videos on the Nancy Drew channel, not only about the Zodiac, but also about JonBenet Ramsey, you'll see that he says a lot of conflicting information. And wait a second, I thought this was your theory about the Zodiac. Now you're going with this and you're not necessarily providing a reason. Some people think that that channel is flat out satire, like it's a joke or it's just like a creative art project, performance piece. I would want to have that conversation with him first. What do you genuinely believe? What are your ideas? Because if somebody were a performance artist, let's say hypothetically, there is a channel out there that's run by someone who doesn't actually believe his own true crime theories. He's just making it up as some type of creative outlet. No, I don't think I would have him on the channel because I want to talk about true crime and people's real theories. And Ross says, who was the nut who called the lawyer on the TV show? Sam, of course. Simon, he was always spotted with the glasses. Could the clip-on ones be prescription, the ones on the hood? Ah, Simon, I will challenge you that about the Zodiac Killer, because was the Zodiac Killer spotted with glasses at the Blue Rock Spring shooting on July 4th of 1969? I don't recall anything about Mike Michaud stating that the Zodiac wore glasses. Now, Mike Michaud said that he saw the killer's face in profile and he couldn't make out any discernible features except that his face was really big. I don't necessarily know if he was hiding anything like that. Libius, do you believe Graysmith wrote some of the Zodiac letters? A different person just asked me that question in the thing when I said, like, what do you want to hear about on this channel? And they asked that same question. What do you think about Robert Graysmith writing the letters? But that question that was sent in, Mr. JSV, was that you? Did you write that one? It said, what do you think about the accusation, or has anybody accused Robert Graysmith of fabricating Zodiac letters? To answer that question, yes. Mr. JSV says, yeah, that was him. He mentioned that yesterday. Has anyone accused Graysmith of fabricating Zodiac letters? Yes, Thomas Henry Horn has accused him for a long time of fabricating the 1978 letter specifically. He said that Robert Graysmith began working on his Zodiac Killer book in 1972. He changed his name from Robert Smith to Robert Graysmith in 1976 because, like making up the pen name. And in 1978, he, in Horn's theory, fabricated the 78 letter so that he could drum up some Zodiac buzz, because he wanted to get a book deal. He wanted to try and publish his Zodiac Killer manuscript, originally with W.W. Norton, but that publishing deal fell through. Horn has also accused Robert Graysmith of fabricating the ciphers, meaning that somebody else designed them, and Graysmith, with his cartoon penmanship, Graysmith was a very good cartoonist. When you actually look at some of his drawings, he was the one who actually did the tracings of the Zodiac ciphers. Oh, and also the Melvin Belli letter. He accuses Graysmith of fabricating the Melvin Belli letter. He's mostly by himself in that camp. But do you believe Graysmith wrote some of the Zodiac letters? I have no reason to think so. I was very curious about that at the time when I first read the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986. And the reason why is because I was listening to several interviews with Thomas Henry Horan, author of the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 86 and 69, and he said at the time that he believed the letters were written by Hal Snook, a Napa County deputy, and that Robert Graysmith was an active participant. And what he was trying to do was to find out if Hal Snook and Robert Graysmith spent time together at Tachikawa Air Force Base in Japan. Graysmith was there, of course, working on the newspaper, the Tachikawa Marauder. Even as a teenager, like 13 years old, he was doing that. And he was trying to find out if they were there at the same time and that these two were both co-conspirators in the whole Zodiac hoax thing. Graysmith working at the Chronicle, Hal Snook with law enforcement, and that they knew each other and they fabricated the whole thing. But I don't think anything ever amounted out of that, and it kind of just didn't go anywhere, so I have definitely stepped back from the theory that Graysmith fabricated letters. Ross says, if Robert Graysmith allowed you 3 questions, what would they be? Number 1, why do you always publish misinformation in your book? Number 2, what was really in your manuscript, This is the Zodiac Speaking, that was supposed to come out in 1981 that didn't get published? And number 3, how do you respond to the accusation that you have fabricated some of the Zodiac letters? Those are the first 3 questions off the top of my head. I haven't thought of anything like that, but people have asked for Robert Graysmith to come on this channel. Yes, I'd love to talk to him. I don't think he's going to. As I understand, Graysmith does not do interviews outside of the mainstream media. Libya says, I think the 86 and 87 letters are also suspicious. Well, we've got Richard Grinnell in the chat. He knows those things better than anyone. He believes that they are authentic. Now, in the past, I have said that if any Zodiac crime, like any non-confirmed Zodiac crime, actually was committed by the Zodiac, it would be the 1986 Sacramento freeway murders, the murders of Koi and Seichao and Choi Fao Sali. I've definitely scaled back from that now, and I would say the Domingos Edwards murders in 63, if there's any unconfirmed event that was the Zodiac Domingos Edwards murders. But yes, there's some similar printing on the 86, 87 letters. Now, this is something that somebody asked me once off the air, like not in the comment section or anything. They said, what do you think about the Zodiac 86 and 87 letters being fabricated by a female zodiologist? I'm like, I know nothing about that. What do you think about them being fabricated by Sandy Betts? And I was like, well, you're just going to ask me that question? I'm going to get on my little keyboard. I'm going to write to Sandy Betts. Hey, Sandy Betts, did you fabricate the 1986 and 87 Zodiac letters? And she said, oh my God, no. That's what I'm going with. Richard Grinnell says, Robert Graysmith never responds to anyone these days. Ken Maines would be an interesting person to interview, but apparently he isn't up for interviews. I think that Ken Maines and I could have a very good discussion on true crime in general. I don't think we would have a lot to talk about with regards to the Zodiac killer. And Richard's right. Ken Maines is mostly in his own world. He kind of likes to sit like this and be like, I'm frustrated with my audience. Not liking the questions that he gets. Unlike me, I absolutely love the questions that you guys ask me about all types of true crime cases. David Griffin says, I'm not sure if that is what Nancy Drew believes, but he has a very interesting timeline laid out on that one. David, how exactly do you mean you're not sure that's what Nancy Drew believes? Now, the Nancy Drew guy, I'm not sure his real name, we could also have a very good discussion on the JonBenet Ramsey case. He made countless episodes on the JonBenet Ramsey case, and we were both also reading this book, The Death of Innocence, at the same time. So, I mean, I first watched his book review, then I was reading the book myself. All kinds of things to explore. Hey, Jared's here. Hey, Jared, happy Halloween to you too. Simon says, who is your absolute prime suspect for the Zodiac? No one. Boring, right? That's not what anybody wants to hear. I'm one of those guys where the more time I spend looking at the case, I find problems with everyone. I have doubts about everyone. And I'm not trying to sell you anything Zodiac related, but so I honestly don't have a suspect, and I'm not convinced by any of the narratives. And the same thing happened to me with Jack the Ripper. As you guys know, on a lot of Wednesdays, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday, which has been lately done is the Jack the Ripper report. But, with Jack the Ripper, it's like, I get that initial spark of curiosity. I think I know what happened. I can tell you what happened. But 5 years from now, I'm going to look back and I was like, wow, was I really thinking that crap? That's the way I am with the Zodiac. So I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. Oh, David was talking to Julian. I'm sorry. Thought you were talking to me. My bad. Ross says, have you ruled out Arthur Lee Allen? No, I haven't ruled out Arthur Lee Allen as a Zodiac killer suspect. I gave him a 5 out of 10, and I included him in my debunking series. All the usual reasons. Sex offender. I don't think the Zodiac was a sex offender. Bald, so he doesn't match the physical descriptions. You have to make the assumption that he was wearing the wig. And also, Arthur Lee Allen was 6 feet tall. What do you do about the 5'8" sightings by Lindsay Robbins, Rebecca Robbins, and Mike Michaud? Not to mention the 5'10" sighting by Don Falk. Lindsay Robbins was presented a photo of Arthur Lee Allen and laughed and said, absolutely, that's not the guy I saw murdering Paul Stein. So there are lots of reasons to doubt. And Jeff Jones is here. Hey, happy Halloween to you, Jeff. Simon says, and what do you think about the Navy connection? The Wingwalker boots, this is your captain speaking. This is the Zodiac speaking connection. LD Hill thoughts? This is your captain speaking. I haven't thought too much about that. I think that this is the Zodiac speaking might be a reference to Detective Story magazine. And there's a story called Sign Z, which you can get on Amazon.com. And I discussed this in the Zodiac Killer News Report that has Jared Kobek's name in the thumbnail. There's a story called Sign Z, and there's this serial killer named Z. And then he says, this is Z calling. I think that might have been the inspiration for the Zodiac letters. And the serial killer Z is trying to murder people who work at banks. And there's this calculated reason involved. A serial killer with an agenda, and it's all planned out. And this just goes to show how there's this snowball effect of different influences on the Zodiac killer's creation. And none of them are original, and a lot of them are childish. Magazines and comic books, maybe even the Red Ryler coloring book. Not even the comic book, the coloring book. So as far as the Wingwalker shoes, I think it's very possible that the Zodiac was in the Navy, yes. What do I think about LD Hill as a Zodiac suspect? Very strong. Ross says, you should mod me. I would be in control of all things. Yeah, I might actually have to do that in the future. And one thing, though, that I think that might happen, I don't have the budget for anything like this, but I would love to have a producer that could be doing things like screening phone calls. So then I can, have like call-in hours, just put like the phone number right up on the bottom, and then people can just call in and ask me true crime questions and all sorts of things. But that'll be definitely easier with a producer. They can also send me certain questions that are going to be like, organized, like they can organize the information. And just true crime talk radio is going to keep expanding. Libya says, Dave Tosky said some of the Zodiac cipher symbols are nautical and meteorological symbols used by sailors. Pilots and sailors also use radians, and Zodiac is talking about radians. Countless things point to the Zodiac having influences from the Navy. The Zodiacs are boats that are used in the Navy. The Zodiacs, when they were designed in the 1930s, and by a French aeronautics company. And also, if my hunch is correct, the Zodiac killer took inspiration for his Lake Berryessa costume from a Spanish capirote hood that he might have obtained when he was in Cadiz, Spain. And that's what I was talking about how the capirote hood has a badge on it, or a seal, or some type of crest, whatever you want to call it, that's sewn on. And maybe he thought he couldn't remove the symbol without damaging the hood, so that's why there's a symbol sewn over it. If it was just a black piece of fabric, he could have just drawn a circle with a white felt tip pen. So countless things point to the Zodiac killer being in the Navy. And when I was talking about this with Thornton Daniel Jeffrey and Melissa Rose Tapa, whose suspect is LD Hill, they said their suspect did go to the Mediterranean, and he did go to Spain. They shared a photo of him in Barcelona, Spain with me, and they don't know if he actually was on the naval base in Cadiz, Spain, but I would expect that he would have passed through there because he went through the Mediterranean on the USS Saratoga. Cadiz, Spain is home to the largest joint Spanish-American naval base. Not that there are a lot of them. Spanish-American naval bases. What are your thoughts on Rick Marshall as the Zodiac? Rick Marshall is someone that I think we go into the category of making things up, lying, not telling the truth. He is someone who wanted to insert himself in, well,
I'm not saying that I am the Zodiac, but if there is a Zodiac out there, I think he's exactly like me. Might be my doppelganger. By the way, I live in a warehouse, but I live in the apartment in the back. It's a fully furnished one-bedroom unit. Don't ever make fun of me for that again.
And he's just a weird guy who likes attention. Now, the thing that I've always wanted to investigate about Rick Marshall is he was born under the name Joe Don Dickey, but he said that he committed a murder. He murdered a man named Rick Marshall and assumed his identity. Is that true? You see, the problem with the Zodiac Killer mystery is quite like a lot of the other true crime cases out there. One question answered leads to more questions. One story is just connected to this interlocking web of true crime stories. And that's going to be something that I just can't find a lot of information about that. Was there ever anybody named Rick Marshall murdered that matches up with Joe Don Dickey losing his identity? Simon says, with the Navy connection, could the crosshair symbols actually be a compass? Yes. Could be also an astrological zodiac sign. As some of you guys know, I used to run the YouTube channel AstroPsych 400, where I would talk about other subjects. And in the graphic for that, I had, AstroPsych 400. It's like the signs of the 12 zodiac, and there's a circle with a cross going through it. You can barely see it because they have all of the zodiac signs on top of it, like Pisces and Aquarius and Gemini and so on. However, absolutely, that could also be an inspiration. But the zodiac did some weird things with the compass because on the map, the Phillips 66 map, he wrote 369 like the face of a clock, and then it says set to magnetic north. A compass doesn't necessarily. Well, a compass would be north, south, east, west, not 369. So my hypothesis is that he just meant that that's supposed to be the top, and then you're actually supposed to just take that circle with the cross going through it the way a compass would have, and you adjust it 17 degrees. Maybe you find radians, maybe you find the actual compass. But Mr. JSV says, it may sound silly, but I think the Zodiac was trying to relive the Batman Colors series starring Adam West. And the show ended in March of 1968. Possible first murder was in December of 1968. No, that's not silly at all if someone's like trying to become a real life villain and so on, or if someone just wants to be some type of masked crusader and kind of like testing the waters with the first two crimes, then develops the persona to get away with things. Yeah, the Zodiac really is a lot of like a lot of Batman villains. Yeah, Mr. JSV, he wants to be one of the villains, sure. Richard Grinnell says, Ned, have you ever considered doing these live chats with just one Zodiac topic in mind, i.e. the Lake Herman Road murders, just heavily focusing in on a deep dive? I could do that. I've actually been thinking about expanding the Thursday show into some other true crime cases because I'm going to be doing Zodiac Monday, of course. I mean, you guys got to understand about Zodiac Monday. I follow this stuff just like you in the chat, just like you in the comment section. I'm just reading about this stuff out of curiosity like anybody else. The next episode is already more than halfway done. Up here, I don't write anything down. It's all mental organization. And interviews are going to be coming out on Fridays. And I'm still going to be trying to release some other interviews on Tuesdays once, we get some more guests for the serial killer spot. But on the Thursdays, I would really like to talk to you guys about some other subjects, such as I might do one on JonBenet Ramsey. I might do one on the Black Dahlia. I might do one on the escape from Alcatraz. Now, I don't know a lot about the escape from Alcatraz, so that's going to be a learning experience for me. D.B. Cooper, that could be another one. And also, would anybody like to propose any other true crime cases that you would like to hear about in one of these live chats where you can ask any particular question? But yeah, why not? I mean, Lake Herman Road murders, Blue Rock Springs shooting, Lake Berryessa, the Stein murder. How about some of the unconfirmed crimes like Sherry Jo Bates and Donna Lass? And when I was listening to Drew Beeson's most recent live stream on his channel, he said that he got in touch with a member of law enforcement, and they talked about the possible Zodiac killer incident involving the Kathleen Johns case, involving Kathleen Johns and her accusation that she was abducted by the Zodiac killer. Drew Beeson said he talked to a member of law enforcement who said Kathleen Johns was checked out and she had no credibility, that she made the whole thing up. I've doubted Kathleen Johns for a very long time. I don't necessarily want to say that she was making it up, but I never thought that she actually interacted with the Zodiac. I never thought that was the Zodiac's MO. A lot of people think that was. The Zodiac killer who abducted Kathleen Johns on March 22nd of 1970? Not me. And I'd really like to know more about the story. I'm sure that Drew probably can't reveal everything. People may have told him this off the record. Because that's a big thing to say that, yeah, we checked it out, and turns out it's not Zodiac related at all. But are there any other unconfirmed Zodiac crimes that you would like to hear about for a live stream? Ray Davis, the Bingo Edwards, the Swindles. I already said Sherry Joe Bates, Donna Lass. Maybe some of the later ones, like the murder of Joan Webster from 1981. In 2021, I used to do a regular segment every weekend about the murder of Joan Webster, and I used to regularly correspond with Eve Carson, who's the author of Bobby's a Mole, Whale of a Tale. And she also wrote a second follow-up book. Both of them are about Joan Webster, and Eve Carson absolutely did not believe any of the Zodiac connections involving the murder of Joan Webster, which is mostly promoted by Gareth Penn and Ray Grant and Joe Fernandez from the Zodiac Killer Insight series. He said she was a possible Zodiac killer victim. She was killed in Massachusetts. I mean, I would love to do a live stream on that particular subject. But when I did the regular segment about the murder of Joan Webster from 1981, it was mostly just about giving Eve Carson a platform to share her ideas. You know, she would write things out, and like she would even design PowerPoint presentations, and I would give them because she wanted to talk about this, and I was very curious at the time. But I fully have to admit that those mostly weren't my own observations. Richard Grinnell says, Leona Laurel Roberts had a phone call and 2 letters attached to it. Oh, I'm actually not familiar with Leona Laurel Roberts. If you have anything else you'd like to share in the chat, Richard, I would try my best to respond to it, but I'm actually just not up to date on that one. But some of the other unconfirmed Zodiac crimes that go into the 1980s would be the 86 freeway murders that I talked about, the Atlanta child murders, which have a connection in 1981, and then once you get to the 1990s, everything gets weird. You have the Zodiac killer being accused of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. You have the Zodiac being accused of murdering Darlie Roudier's children. And then in 2005, the Zodiac gets accused of murdering Teresa Hallback, the woman who was murdered that becomes the foundation story for Making a Murderer with Stephen Avery. So I also have to be very aware that even though I want to talk about different true crime stories with you guys on this channel, I don't want things to get out of control. Some of the things I have talked about in the past are the Zodiac was responsible for the Black Dahlia murder, the escape from Alcatraz. Most recently, I talked about how the Zodiac started a fire on an aircraft carrier that killed 28 people. Someone else also sent me something about, hey, do you think the Zodiac was responsible for derailing 2 trains? Not 1, but 2. And I just had to take a step back and be like, all right. I know the focus of this show is that I talk about different types of true crime stories, but I'm reaching a certain limit where I might just have to get one of those stop signs that a traffic guard has and just be like, whoa. I'm going to have to really reevaluate these things because I don't know if there's any evidence to suggest that the Zodiac ever derailed a train. Now, the stuff about the fire on the aircraft carrier, I heard them out, and I've evaluated that, and I've given my feedback. I've also discussed the role of people in the JonBenet case, the Black Dahlia case. Those are a little bit easier because I'm just like, well, no, I don't think it was the Zodiac killer because the Zodiac didn't commit crimes like that. John Cameron, who is the author of the book on Edward Wayne Edwards and thinks he's the Zodiac, says that Edward Wayne Edwards committed the Black Dahlia murder. Now, one of the reasons why Ken Maines is like all pissed off and such is because he's like, Edward Wayne Edwards was 13 years old. No, he didn't do it. No, he didn't do it. 13 years old, cutting up Elizabeth Short's body. Absolutely not. And Ross says he likes the deep dive idea. All right, great. Which one would you guys like to hear about in the future? And you can always send me things to BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can send in things to my personal Facebook, which is in the description box of most episodes. I'm going to copy all that stuff in later on. BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram. And if you'd like to support any of these efforts, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below for future episodes. And you can also go over to BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And Ross says there was some recent DB Cooper news. What was that actually? I'd like to know. Simon says, I always thought with murder at the library, where the watch was left behind, maybe he got paranoid later that he left evidence, so wrote again, saying the first letter was a hoax by a troubled youth. Well, as far as I understand, they tracked back like who made that admission. What Simon's talking about is that in 2016, somebody confessed to fabricating the Bates Had to Die letters. 3 letters were mailed in the spring of 1967. That 2 of them said, Bates had to die, there will be more. The third one said, she had to die, there will be more. And they were signed with what appears to be a Z. Countless debates to this day exist on what that symbol was. Somebody confessed and said, hey, I fabricated those letters as a teenager. I was a troubled youth at the time. Not the exact words, but he said he was a messed up teenager and he did it as a prank or a sick joke. 2016, roughly 50 years later. And that news was shared with us in 2021. Now, was that anything Zodiac related? Well, as I understand, they found out who the guy was. They looked into him. They determined that number 1, he was not the Bates killer. And number 2, that he was not the Zodiac. Now, do you mean that the Zodiac asked him to do that as like a hoax? He was worried about DNA evidence or something? I wouldn't put that past any type of serial killer. But as far as true crime cases go, we can always make some recommendations. And, I do follow other subjects. And somebody wrote this out in the comment section after hearing my most recent interview with Adam Ivester, saying Ned would be a good therapist, the way that he talks to people. And I decided that that isn't really necessarily going to be my path, because I have found that you can find strategies online that aren't coming from the world of therapy or conventional psychology, but people just are online and they talk about different strategies and behaviors that you can observe to put into action. And I mean, those are the things that I find to be so valuable. I recently heard this thing in someone else's live stream where they said there's this book called The Love Cure that talks about 3 forms of communication: communication toward, communication against, and communication away. Communication toward is like complimentary behavior, being nice, optimistic comments, encouraging words. Communication against are things like negative emotions, being mean, trying to embarrass someone, hurting people's feelings. And communication away is not paying attention, not being aware of the social situation. And one thing that I had to learn the hard way was dealing with communication away. I struggle with this to this day, and I really had to learn that, like when I'm talking to people, I got to like pay attention to what's going on, because when you're not focused on how people are perceiving you, that's when they start trying to take advantage of you. That's when they start doing mean things simply because they aren't aware of it. You see what I mean about how when people give you kind of thought exercises that you can try out, you can put that into action. Like pay attention to when you're using communication toward, communication against, or communication away. Those are the things that I like exploring: strategies, action plans, all of that. Simon says, didn't realize it was 2016. Thought that was shortly after. In 2016, yes, somebody admitted to that about 50 years later, unless you're referring to one of the other things like the Riverside Confession in November of 1966, the desktop poem in 1967, and then the Bates Had to Die letters come in the spring of 1967. Did I say 67 twice? The Riverside Confession is in November of 1966. The desktop poem was discovered in December of 1966. And then in the spring of 1967, someone fabricated the 3 letters, and he admitted that in 2016. But I find, though, that with these types of mental exercises, that's where the value is. And yeah, if people want to talk through that stuff with me all the time, I'll share things like one of them is I also had to learn how to be more assertive. And Dr. Robert Glover talks a lot about this in his book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, when he said, if you want to practice assertiveness training, then firstly, think of a very assertive person. Just write this down. How did they handle a situation? What did they do about it? And what were the steps they took when someone raised their voice to them? What did they say back? You can do things like that. Another aspect of assertiveness training is 3 times a day, ask somebody to do something for you that you could do yourself. Like his example, have somebody else make your photocopies for you. I'm like, I am not that evil. I'm never asking anyone to make my photocopies for me. But and I think that something like that is very good to be assertive. But I used to do that. I used to put that plan into action. What they don't tell you in those books is people will not like you. I mean, you really have to separate this set of things. You're being assertive for you because you want to be like have a higher ranking position in the hierarchy, not to get along with people. So that's what I find extremely challenging because I just don't like the concept of trying to dominate people just to dominate them. It makes no sense to me. I mean, you could be spending time with people that you actually like and so on. And Simon says, I always thought the fact that he wrote the letter so quickly after the Stein murder claiming it, he must have been very confident that he didn't leave behind evidence because she was linking himself to all Zodiac. Oh, Jerome is here. Hey, Jerome, how you doing? Happy Halloween. Now, as far as the events after the Stein murder, number one, the Zodiac provided a piece of Paul Stein's shirt. In the letter, I think he did it. Number two, Jeremy Berthium, author of So I See You Don't Paint Houses, might be completely correct when he said that the Zodiac highlighted a piece of text on the letter saying, print this in paper. Only a certain portion of his story was true. The thing about two cops pulled a goof and almost arrested me, that part was true and everything else was a lie. Also, and the Zodiac saying, I only look like the composite sketch when I commit murders. What's he supposed to say? Now you know what I look like? I didn't leave any fingerprints behind. Those aren't mine. What else would he say? Okay, and Mr. JSV has a question for Jerome. Have you called the FBI lately? Does Jerome have a big discovery that he wants to share with us? Jerome runs the channel The French Wrecking Crew, and last time on the live stream, I was talking about his Jeffrey Dahmer documentary that he uploaded. I mean, not one that he produced, but he shared the documentary Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. There are a lot of true crime episodes that have been uploaded on Jerome's channel, and they're with French subtitles if anyone's from the French-speaking world. Maybe Jerome and I will do a French-speaking episode one day. I don't speak French, so I'll just sit there and listen and be like, oui, non, pas exactement, mon frère. I'll just say like noises and such. But now, if Jerome has a true crime discovery, I would definitely like to hear more about that. So, in terms though of like how you deal with people in life, there really just has to be this type of decision making. How do you want to interact with people? Do you want to just have like a set of principles that you want to live by? Because so many of these things people are talking about are like strategies. Well, strategies for what? I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get your personality to toughen up. And what you can do is you can just make your own set of rules. They don't have to be approved by anybody else as long as they're what you believe to be in line with conventional morality, ethics, as well as an understanding of human behavior. Nothing like these serial killers that kill and they say, oh, well, I had the right to do that because I'm a narcissist. Absolutely not. But you say that I think this is what is fair to me, and this is how I'm going to try and succeed in life, and I'm not going to hurt anyone in the process. Have you seen those memes that go around and say, what is your personal philosophy? Do no harm, take no shit. That's what all these self-help books are going at. And they can give you some strategies and mental exercises to try and put them together. And Jerome says, it will be great, Ned. Oh, if we do a French language episode, anytime, sir. And, Mr. JSV is going to keep waiting for Jerome to contact the FBI. You guys have some kind of inside joke going on. You got to clue me in on that. But Richard, I didn't mean to ignore your last comment. Richard says he's going to send me some things about a particular true crime case. And right now I would like to get back to the comments in the chat, and that some of you guys left about recommendations and what do you want to hear about on the channel. What type of things do you like following? And a lot of people have said history and the paranormal. Now, the paranormal stuff is a little bit hard to cover because I find that the audience for this channel is mostly divided. Some people absolutely love ghost stories. Other people want nothing to do with them. The Zodiac Killer channel tried to launch a paranormal series in 2021, and I have no ownership of the Zodiac Killer channel. I just do narrations, or I hosted the interview series, but that's just it. Like I'll just do the narrations or I'll do the talking, but I have no ownership of that. And I was like, why don't we do a tie-in series? Look at all of these Zodiac connections. Do like a mini documentary on the Golden State Killer, and then talk about the Zodiac Golden State connection. Do a mini documentary on the Black Dahlia, and then talk about the Black Dahlia connection, the Manson family, the escape from Alcatraz. You name it, there's a Zodiac Killer connection out there. And then it would sort of be like, say, for example, with the Golden State Killer, we'd be talking about the hunt for the Golden State Killer and say, and because this is the Zodiac Killer channel, stick around to the end and we will talk about the theory that the Golden State Killer and the Zodiac were one and the same. That was what I was hoping that they would do, because the Zodiac Killer channel, of course, has some good animation and some sound and all that. Oh, Richard Grinnell says, are you interested in space, Ned, the mysteries of the universe? Yes, absolutely. I mean, it depends on how you're asking for that. Are you talking about like the conspiracy theories, like did we actually land on the moon? My answer to that is yes. And I can talk to you for hours about all the ways we did land on the moon and so on. And or do you mean like the mysteries of space? Like, are we going to Mars anytime soon? Now, in the past, I even did an old black box recording about this called Humans Living on the Moon. Please don't listen to it. The audio's all back. But firstly, some people say before we go to Mars, we have to either colonize the moon or establish some type of human-dwelling base on the moon. You have theorists out there like Michael Shermer saying, we don't need to go to the moon, it's a waste of time. And then there are other people saying that the moon is going to be our gateway into the solar system. First, we need to land on the moon, have some type of lunar base that can go there with a launch pad for spaceships that can go to other parts of the solar system. Now, sometimes they say that science fiction can mirror, or not mirror, but science fiction can predict the future. And in the past, I began to think, so many people are talking about going to Mars. What's going to happen after that? And I thought, Uranus. Some people call it Uranus. I don't like that for obvious reasons. And I was like, Neptune is filled with these storms in its atmosphere, but Uranus is mostly clear. And a closely guarded secret is there is water on both Neptune and Uranus. It's like ammoniumized water. I'm not using the right term. It's like it's a different type of water, but it does exist. And imagine if you could harness H2O from the atmosphere of Uranus and have space stations that would circle the planet. And I actually wrote out this short story about humans that live in the upper atmosphere of Uranus. And it's like science fiction, right? I had a girlfriend at the time, and I decided to push the boundaries. I'm like, I know I'm taking a big risk, but I'm going to talk to her about science fiction. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? She broke up with me like 2 weeks after that. I was like, I knew it. I should never told her I wrote a science fiction story. I've never done that since. I'm not talking to another woman about science fiction unless I get like the okay go, unless she gives me the green light. Richard says, no, for example, how do you reconcile an infinite universe and its origins? Well, I mean, infinite universe, do you mean like the singularity with infinite mass and zero volume, and that the laws of gravity have to approach infinity and they collapse in on themselves, therefore creating the Big Bang? If that's what you mean. Somebody shared this to me once, that there's something called the null set. And in mathematics, there is a set of zeros which forms a set of zeros inside of set of zeros. And that forms the set of zeros inside a set of zeros inside of set of zeros, which then creates one. The same way like mathematics can explain how you would create one from the null set. And then basically the Big Bang was a bunch of ones, and then ones combine, and then that creates the integer. So you can have plus and minus, and then everything just gets spread out, and the gravity and radiation begins to spread too. Now, Richard asked a very good question, because there are these two guys named the Huang twins, and they made a complete model of the universe. We're talking about the observable universe, 28 gigaparsecs in diameter. And, you can see like a model of the universe. And then I'm like, it's shaped like a circle, right? Even though the universe is actually a saddle shape. But imagine like it's just shaped like a circle. And I'm like, well, what's over here? What's over here? Well, what is that? Even if there are multiple universes out there, well, what's in between them? Is anything in between them? Here's a theory that I will dispute. You have somebody like Alex Jones going on Joe Rogan and saying that the global elites are obsessed with eternal life and they're trying to communicate with beings in other dimensions. And what dark matter is that it's gravity from these other dimensions and universes that is bleeding into our universe. Dark matter, dark material. And I don't think that's true, because this was once shared to me that if another universe exists, it will have a completely different set of physics, different laws of physics, because mathematically, it is improbable that the Big Bang would have happened the same way. Now, we don't have any knowledge of other universes, but if they exist, then how would gravity be able to bleed into our universe? I don't quite know. Some people think that there's going to be something like the Tesseract. If you watch the movie Interstellar, you can see like a Tesseract in action. And a little bit of that was explored in The Simpsons, where Homer goes into 3D, enters the third dimension, and says, "Holy macaroni!" And he's all 3D, and he's like, not quite in the Tesseract, but I think they were talking about the second dimension to the third dimension to the fourth dimension. That stuff is amazing. I mean, if you want to do a full episode on that. About space. I mean, I once learned that the largest star in our solar system was VY Canis Majoris, and if it were placed in the location of our sun, it's a red hypergiant, it would go out to the orbit of Saturn. Like, there wouldn't be any Earth, it wouldn't be Jupiter, it would go out to the orbit of Saturn. And when you stop and think about how a star can be that big, that's when space starts to get really complicated and complex. You're like, wow, we're so insignificant. And then when you also think about some of the biggest objects in the universe, the Salome Great Wall, the Lyman Alpha Blob, you have clusters of galaxies and clusters of galaxies that are all linked together through space material and so on. I mean, that stuff gets pretty intense. But are you guys curious about other things in relation to space? Are you also curious about some of the conspiracy theories out there? As far as the moon landing goes, I think that, well, I met a guy from Russia once that just said, there are people who believe that we did not land on the moon, that nobody has landed on the moon because it would be impossible. And he was like, the Americans were in a space race with the Soviets. This is a Russian guy talking. The Soviets recorded the transmission from the Americans going back from the moon to planet Earth. So it's more or less like documented that it took place. Jerome says, I have read your book about Zodiac. Great book. And we don't have the same theory. Richard Grinnell, you have a book about the Zodiac? I didn't know Richard had a book out there. Excuse me if I've overlooked that. I mean, I've definitely read a lot of articles on Richard's website. But more or less, there's a lot of certification that that we landed on the moon. The strongest telescopes that we have can see a candle burning on the moon. They can see the flag. They can see the lunar rover. They can see all types of things that show that we were there, partnered with testimony of people like Buzz Aldrin and the late Neil Armstrong, which say that we landed on the moon. Now, the question of, yes, they landed on the moon, but some of the video that you saw was faked in a studio and it was directed by Stanley Kubrick. That's fine. I don't even care if the video was fake. What difference does it make? We landed on the moon. How cool is that? Now, a little bit far out there. But Richard Grinnell says no, he doesn't have a Zodiac killer book out there. So, Jerome, just curious, which book were you reading? I mean, you're not talking about mine. I don't have a Zodiac killer book either. So, also, I'd like to know this theory that you don't agree upon. And as far as I understand, Jerome's theory is that it involves Don Chaney and Sandy Panzarella, and they're connected into the Zodiac mix. Am I getting that right? But Richard asked about mysteries in space, and one of them is going to be, if we are going to colonize the solar system, they have this conception of human beings are going to leave Earth, and then they're going to be going through, well, more or less the entire solar system. And it might take about 70 years for that to happen. And we would need a spaceship that could exist in the vacuum of space for 70 years, meaning that a full generation of people wouldn't be born on the spaceship. That like you're gonna have like men and women, almost like a Noah's Ark or something, except it's just humans. Maybe they'll bring like one or two plants. They should bring a dog. You need at least one dog in space. We learned that from Vostok and the Russians. But I mean, who's gonna volunteer for that? By the way, to you guys who are listening right now, would you go to Mars if you had the chance? I know that Elon Musk is going to be the first one there, and I don't know if I'd want to go to Mars with him because I think he's weird, smart, brilliant. I'd go to him for business advice any day, but I think he's weird. I don't know if I want to spend a lifetime on a ship with Elon Musk or even the trip to Mars. Mr. JSV says, no way. Well, if you go to Mars, firstly, here are the conditions. You are never going back. You can never come back to Earth. That's one thing. Number two, you might be able to communicate with Earth, but it would be more or less like you're going to make a call and there's going to be a 20-minute delay. So you might just be able to say a message and you could wait 20 minutes and then your family might be able to respond to you. Mr. JSV says, I love Earth. I would go to Uranus if I could, so I could test out my little upper atmosphere space stations that I would like to put into action. And Richard says, too risky, you've got only one life. Have you not seen some of the space shuttles that take off and then they explode? What is it? Challenger and Columbia also didn't survive. At the same time, we have Sandra Bullock in the movie Gravity. If you haven't seen that one yet, it's all about, an astronaut trying to come back to Earth. And, I'm drawing a blank right now. What was the name of the female astronaut who murdered a man, but she wore a diaper, so like an astronaut diaper, so she could sit in her car and she didn't have to stop to use the bathroom, so she could drive across state lines. Everybody always conflates her with Jodi Arias. They always confuse her with Jodi Arias, but that wasn't Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias was the woman who murdered Travis Alexander, and she filled up gas cans, like gas canisters, and put them in the trunk so she didn't have to stop for gas and leave any thing behind. And believe it or not, the old episodes of the Stones Unturned podcast from Thomas Henry Horan had some, rather interesting comments about Jodi Arias. And I particularly liked what he said about how she had an extremely symmetrical face, and that might have contributed to her psychopathy. Ted Bundy also had an extremely symmetrical face, and that might have been contributing to his psychopathy. What Thomas Horan was talking about was that people with extremely symmetrical faces are very attractive to people. Michael Shermer, the psychologist, goes into this all the time, saying, clear skin and symmetrical faces, I don't have either one, but there's signs of strong genetic health and people are attracted to them. So somebody might be thinking that everybody is just liking me for my physical appearance. Now I can manipulate them. Oh, and Richard says the name of the astronaut was Lisa Novak. Thank you. I would never have thought of that, like completely slipped my mind. Mr. GSV says, I'd like to hear conspiracies about the Challenger, how the crew had twins. Now, the Challenger is the one where they had the teacher in space who would she was supposed to go into space and teach lessons to the world or something. All they had twins. I have never heard of that conspiracy. Mr. JSV, I'll have to check that one out. But thanks for sharing that name, Lisa Novak, with me, Richard Brunell. I'm going to look into that one. I've never done an episode on the astronaut diaper murder. But as far as Jodi Arias goes, I have at least 2 episodes about her, old black box recordings, where I was discussing the case of Jodi Arias, and it's another example of just a saddening story because, like so many of these true crime stories that I've been talking about recently on Black Box Online Radio, it's all unnecessary. Now, to you guys who follow the Zodiac case, when we actually find the Zodiac killer, if and when, do you think that he was a degenerate, or do you think he was someone who probably had a reasonable life, like a job, his own residence? He was earning money. Some people might even think he had a family. We don't know about that yet. But much like that, most people think that the Zodiac was some ordinary guy who just worked a boring job and no one paid attention to. And I think that it's all of these people who are involved with these true crime stories where they don't have to commit this. It's done purely for power, purely because of fueling neurochemicals in their brain. They just want to feel that exhilaration of murdering someone and dominating someone whom they believe to be inferior to them. And it's sickening. It's disgusting. What is wrong with people? If you don't like somebody, just don't talk to them. End of story. Jerome, the French Wrecking Crew, says, by the way, about the Stephen Avery case, Teresa Hallback died on Halloween in 2005. Rest in peace to Teresa Hallback. Jerome, we haven't had a big chance to talk about the new series out there that is called Convicting a Murderer. The one that I was discussing last week about the new series from the Daily Wire Plus, the one that was done by Candace Owens talking about convicting a murderer. What do you, if you want to share anything in the chat, what you think about that? I know you've posted some of the rebuttal podcast on your Facebook page, but Stephen Avery was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Teresa Hallback in 2005. She died on Halloween, as Jerome said. Brendan Dassey, Stephen Avery's nephew, was also convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. I believe he's eligible for parole in the 2040s, so he's still quite a ways away. Or maybe it's when he turns 42 or something like that. Don't even quote me on that. I don't want to misstate something. But with Stephen Avery, I mean, they're now trying to really vilify him in the court of public opinion, because when I first started talking about Stephen Avery here on Black Box Online Radio, he was still mostly regarded as someone who had been framed and railroaded. And Jerome says, convicting a murderer is a lot of BS in my opinion, Ned. Why not? I mean, yes, please say. Like, the people who closely follow this point out how they... we have a bunch of comments coming in now. Avery and Dassey did not receive a fair trial. No, I can't even tell you about this because someone has some unpublished research on another true crime case. But more or less, a very similar thing happened to Brendan Dassey that happened in this other true crime case, and that person got off. You know, about confessing to a crime. Brendan Dassey made a confession that he and Stephen Avery murdered Teresa Hallback. Then he retracted the confession, and most people believe he was duped into confessing, or he just wanted the interrogation to stop. And those types of crimes happen all the time. I should bring you to the story of Michael Crow. They made 2 movies about him, I believe. They're both called The Interrogation of Michael Crow, where he confessed to murdering his sister. They're like, we have your blood on her body. We have your, like fingerprints on the murder weapon. And he confessed just because he wanted the interrogation to stop. And this is something else that I've talked about in previous episodes. Now they're openly telling police officers, number one, not to yell at victims even during interrogations, because when people are under intense stress, they're more likely to confess to something that they didn't commit or show signs of guilt just because they were caught off guard and so on. But Richard Brunel says, Pat Brown is a great profiler. Avery is as guilty as can be. Well, that's going to bring up some sparks with Jerome, but I've really only looked at Pat Brown's material for the Jack the Ripper case, and in my podcast, you'll see 2 images of her books going by. I would really like to get into her material on the murder of Cleopatra, because she has a lot of really interesting observations about that. But as far as Avery being as guilty as can be, what's my favorite saying? Being weird is not a crime. Just because somebody may have made some comments that have bothered people or made people uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean that he was guilty. And also, his defense is that evidence was planted on him. And they're saying, well, you can't plant certain types of DNA. Like, you can't plant sweat DNA. And I'm like, why not? Wouldn't you just need a sample of his sweat or something like that? And Jeff Jones says, all kinds of conflicts of interest in the case. Well, definitely stuff like that, but I'm more focused on, did Stephen Avery do it? I completely understand the narrative about how Brendan Dassey was mistreated, misled, misguided. I've used the free Brendan Dassey hashtag all the time. And also when you heard, Jerome actually posted this video, right, about someone who regularly contacts him in prison, and he just is asking questions about Pokemon. He wants new Pokemon coloring books so he can color them in. And maybe there is some truth about how he didn't have the cognitive faculties to understand what was going on. And Jeff Jones says, Pat Brown is one of those who believes everyone charged is guaranteed guilty. What I don't get from her is why she just doesn't accept that there can be people out there with conflicting theories. I mean, my theory's obviously right, and then there are other people who don't think like me and they're wrong, but I'm right because this is the way I think. And I'm like, I obviously come at it from a different standpoint in the true crime world because I want to hear different points of view. And I openly said, people can come on the show as long as they are telling the truth, they have enough material, and they are aware of reality. And Richard Grinnell says the Netflix documentary was heavily biased and slanted. That's what Convicting a Murderer is trying to share. They're trying to show that the Netflix documentaries, they're cutting up the footage in a certain way. They're trying to present Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey as sympathetic characters when Stephen Avery was actually a criminal thug, more or less. He was involved in multiple burglaries, assaults, all types of things prior to the attack on Penny Bernstein, which he did not do. DNA exonerated him. And then while he was in prison, he dealt with some type of torturous plan to murder a woman and get away with it. Now, the Netflix documentary didn't even mention all the problems with the case. So I think my stance with that has been pretty clear in the past, that they took a position. Not all documentaries are only going to give the facts. Some of them are going to have an opinionated stance, and they're going to try and persuade the audience. And I think they tried to persuade the audience towards Stephen Avery being innocent. That's why it's called Making a Murderer, that this guy might have been framed for a crime, or just the story of a man could have been sent to jail twice for decades for crimes that he didn't commit. Jerome says, the timeline about Stephen Avery on October 31st, 2005 didn't fit with the narrative of the state. In my opinion, it was impossible for him to kill anyone on Halloween. That is something that has really been a question of mine, because the prosecution, as well as Convicting a Murderer, put forward this timeline that Stephen Avery calls Teresa Hall back multiple times, or he's calling he's calling and requesting Teresa Hall back to come to his property, the Avery salvage yard, to photograph a vehicle for Auto Trader. And some way, somehow, there's either an assault that takes place in her car, or Stephen Avery lures her into his trailer, ties her down, handcuffs her, or secures her to the bed in some ways, and then he rapes her. Then Brendan Dassey walks by, he hears the noises, and Stephen Avery's like, come on in, come on in. He wants him to go do something with her, and then Stephen Avery shoots her in the head with a .22, and either the assault took place in the car, or Stephen Avery had her blood on his body, and he had cut himself while he was assaulting her, and then he gets in her Toyota RAV4, drives somewhere on the Avery salvage yard, and then attempts to hide the car, but not very well. Okay, Jerome has a point here, but can I just say flat out, what kind of person do you have to be to try and hide Teresa Hallback's car on your own property? I don't care if there are 4,000 vehicles, 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles on the Avery salvage yard. Ridiculous. Now, that isn't anything about Stephen Avery's guilt or innocence. If someone were to actually do that, it's ridiculous. Well, I'm going to try and hide this car. Like, I'm gonna take this and I'm going to put it over here. No one's going to find it. And if they do find it, it'll never be traced back to me. Of course it would. Now, some people are like, oh, he wasn't that bright. No, I see that Stephen Avery seems like he's kind of aware of what's going on. Now, another point. Jerome says, great point. Now, well, here's another point. I don't know if they covered this yet in Convicting a Murderer. In the second season of Making a Murderer, Stephen Avery did this type of neurocranial testing. It's like a lie detector, but they showed him photos of things from Teresa Hallback's murder scene, and they wanted to test to see if his brain had any recollection of these. It's like a neurocranial test. Like, he's wearing this thing, a neurocranial transmitter, and I'm sure Jerome knows exactly what I'm talking about. And they're showing him these images, and does it register in his memory? And none of them did. And he's like, I know I didn't murder her. Now, some people might point to that and be like, that's pseudoscience. That's just like a hyped up lie detector. I don't know. It's the first time I've ever seen that. But that was something else that was shared, and that's part of Kathleen Zellner's defense. Oh, and the neurocranial tests are used by the CIA, says Jerome. Well, lie detectors are used by the CIA too. The CIA, the FBI, the military, law enforcement, all of them use lie detectors. And lie detectors enter into a very large world of conflict. Some people believe that lie detectors are bunk, nonsensical, pseudoscience. Here's an unpopular opinion. I actually believe that lie detectors are more valuable than people lead on. I think that lie detectors are more valuable and more accurate than most other people because in the past, they weren't very good. In the 1980s, maybe even the early 90s, lie detectors were not very good. And I know we've been talking about the neurocranial imaging, but lie detectors were not very good. They were done with three parts: heart rate, blood pressure, and galvanic skin tension. I mean, people were like, you could just fake that by being really calm. And even they said a psychopath could fool a lie detector because they wouldn't give the sensory images. It's like, did you kill that person? No. Are you sure? Yes. Like they wouldn't give the responses. But now they have the computerized polygraph, which measures physiological tracings in the body. Like when you think with your memory, you give off these types of physiological tracings. And when you think with your imagination, you give off these types of physiological tracings. And the parts of the brain that use the imagination create larger physiological tracings. So I think that they're more accurate than other people want to admit. However, in the second season of Making a Murderer, something completely different. Stephen Avery was wearing this device on his head, and it's trying to register images in his memory. Like, does your brain recall seeing this image? And he did not. So now Jerome and Jeff Jones, both of you guys in the comment section seem to think that Stephen Avery was innocent. What do you think about the story from his cellmate in prison saying that when he wanted to get out of prison, he had a plan to torture a woman, that he had concocted a plan to torture a woman, that when he was in prison, he didn't even care if he had been thrown in the hole or something like that. He didn't care about punishments. He was just indifferent to what people would do to him. He was fearless in somewhat of a deviant way. Do you think any of that would suggest that he could be guilty of the murder of Teresa Hallback, or that he was planning on committing a murder when he got out of prison? And Jerome says BS. I guess he thinks that that's bullshit. But overall, though, I guess I've always had the standpoint that I think that Brendan Dassey should be released from prison. Stephen Avery, I'm not sure about, and they provided a little bit more insight into his character, but I'm not really giving up on the full possibility of him being innocent. It's quite possible. But at this time, though, I just want to remind you guys that today is Halloween. Happy Halloween to everyone. And I was really planning on talking about more Halloween-related things, like horror movies and just Halloween candy and so on. But you guys wanted to talk about the Zodiac Killer and some of these other true crime cases. Big thank you to Richard Grinnell for bringing up the stuff about space. I love talking about all of those things and so on. And maybe I'll do a future episode about that for the Anything Goes Friday segment. As far as Halloween goes, does anybody have any final notes about that? I wish I had a costume this year. I wish I could just sit back and eat something like a Zero bar. Do you guys have Zero bars in your part of the country? It's the one that has like the nougat with white chocolate all surrounding it. Now that I'm old, I used to just go to Walmart back in West Virginia, and I would get me 1 Zero candy bar, and I would be like, that was my Halloween. Can't really eat candy too much like a kid anymore, but I do have a certain weakness for jelly beans. I love jelly beans, especially them Jelly Belly things that taste all weird and such. The ones that are pear flavored and actually taste like pears. Those are so good. I still can't believe that baseball player didn't like Tootsie Rolls. Sometimes I just go out and I buy Tootsie Rolls. And Jerome says, what do you think about the Halloween that was directed by Rob Zombie? Rob Zombie directed Halloween 1 and Halloween 2 and like the 2 remakes. And number one, I am glad that they had Danielle Harris in there. She doesn't play her original character, Jamie Lloyd. She plays Annie Brackett in those. In Halloween 2, I think that they showed way too much of Michael Myers' face in the mask. Like, the mask was kind of just like half torn off. And believe it or not, I got extremely sad when Danielle Harris died in Halloween 2, and I was just like, oh, how tragic. And maybe I was just a little bit insensitive when I was watching the other Halloween movies as a kid. Simon says, Happy Halloween from Australia. Hey, happy Halloween to you too. We're going around the globe here. We got Belgium, Australia, the Philippines, England, and of course, everybody in the United States of America. The thing with Rob Zombie is he has this expectation that he has to be very bloody and very gory and so on. But he doesn't necessarily have to do that. One of the things that is so brilliant about John Carpenter's Halloween is that it's not overly bloody or gory. It's all about how there's this person who is trying to kill a particular victim, and he will kill anyone in his way, but it's all about there's this mysterious reason that is driving him to kill. Whereas some things that were discussed in John Carpenter's Halloween, like eating and drinking dog's blood, are actually shown in the Rob Zombie movie, especially in Halloween 2, like he's eating dog's blood and so on, and drinking dog's blood, excuse me, is like, we don't need to see that, or whatever it was. Richard Grinnell says, do you think that the adding of a second skeleton is pertinent to the two victims Zodiac is referring to? Seems like a lot of effort, and if it means nothing. I don't know how people are going to take this response, but Tom Voigt once wrote out a message in the comment section on Black Box Online Radio that he has examined the documents firsthand, and that the skeleton that's on the inside of the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card was the posable novelty skeleton that was positioned to look like it was hanging from the spider web. And that's it. About how it's like intricate or anything, he said it looks like a third grader made it. That's factual. It is positioned so that it's hanging from the spider web. As far as that goes, all the other theories I'm not convinced of. Maybe something about the eyes. That could be a big one. That the Zodiac altered the skeleton's eyes and so on. And Simon has something about that. I think the added eyes he drew could be for the victims he killed. Very possible. Very possible. And Drew Beeson proposed a new theory in his most recent live stream when he was talking about how they might have actually been from a place in Bakersfield that had a similar shape on the building, like the additional eyes were something reminiscent to Bakersfield, and his suspect spent a lot of time in Bakersfield. Drew Beeson's suspect is, of course, Donald Lee Cheney. But, Richard, why do people insist that the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card is just filled with these intricate clues? Could it not have just been that it was a greeting card that came with a little plastic slip that had a skeleton in it and a pumpkin sticker in it, and he just kind of like pasted the things on any odd way? I am just not completely convinced that either one of those have some type of deep meaning. And maybe he just made this up to look a little bit weird and to fill space, and maybe it was just meant to be spooky and so on. That's why I said I was so critical of Dale Julian, who says that he can extract paragraphs of text from the Halloween card. And I'm like, why? How do you know that other than just your own mental gymnastics? Jerome says, about the second dancing skeleton, is it male or female? Any thoughts on that? Well, again, that's what Drew was talking about recently, saying that the one on the outside is male and the one on the inside is female. A lot of people like to look at the skeleton with the pumpkin that was pasted over the groin area or the midsection, and David Gold says that's because the Zodiac was impotent, and Kevin Robert Brooks would say that's because he's donning pumpkin breeches, and that his suspect is Donald Lee Booyock. And again, those are just very, very extreme claims. Also, if the posable novelty skeleton was just pasted on, and it maybe had some extra ribs drawn on or something, I don't even know about that, so I don't want to guess. I don't know if there's enough evidence to say that it's a female. Richard says, do you think the symbol being placed on the return address of the envelope has any relevance? I used to in the past. I used to really like the idea that was put forward by Yves Persson, the French school teacher, when he thought that it was spelling out the Zodiac's name with a combination of letters mashed into one. Because at the bottom of the Halloween card, there's the symbol that he's talking about, Richard's talking about, and there's the Z, and then there's the circle with a cross going through it. So it's like last name, Zodiac Killer, or the Zodiac's name, Zodiac symbol, Zodiac Killer. And Pumpkin was maybe the nickname of one of his victims. Out of curiosity, Jerome, who was nicknamed Pumpkin? Which victim had the nickname Pumpkin? I haven't heard that before. But as far as the Zodiac symbol being the killer's name now, I'm not sure. All I can say is there's an extraordinarily similar symbol that was found on the Red Rider comic books and the Red Rider coloring book, which is called the Paint Book. And it appears that the Zodiac seemed to have some type of fondness for Westerns and comic books, or at the very least, the Halloween card has some type of connection to Westerns and comic books. Oh, I don't know, just an idea. Okay. Pumpkin is a very common nickname to give to a girl, especially someone whom you're romantically connected to. Was it referring to Darlene Farron or something? That'll be a whole can of worms to explore. In the past, I used to really try to connect the dots, and I was inspired by David Gold, of course. I've been talking about him a lot in this video. And David Gold put forward the idea that the solution to the Z13 cipher is connect the dots. And when you look at the Halloween card, if you connect all these eyes that are out there, it can reveal a name. And I tried to do that, but not using David Gold's method, and I came up with R, J, S, and G. And you might be thinking, Richard, Joseph, Gaikowski, R, J, and G, right? That was one thing I thought about. In the past, also, Robert Graysmith Jr., when I looked more at Graysmith being a participant. As of now, I don't think Graysmith was a participant. That was just, like looking at Thomas Horn's theory and expanding upon it. But R, J, and G easily. Richard Joseph Gaikowski. Richard Grinnell says, I think it's a join Z and an F, and the Zodiac is saying 14, just like the 14 and the 14. That's brilliant, Richard. That really is brilliant. That could be exactly what he's referring to. But I have to pass the card back to you, Richard, because what is the Zodiac's obsession with 14? Is it just a body count? Is he referring to some clue about his name? Is he just trying to talk about where he lives? Or was it some type of significance to him? I mean, was this the number of people that he killed, or is it something that has a deeper meaning? Like, do we look at, like, the 14th letter of the English language, and that's his first initial? Is it something to that effect? I think that that's really perplexing. Now, the Zodiac did seem to like to keep a scorecard, but Jerome says, any connections about the Z13 and the 13 eyes? Well, that's what I was saying about David Gold's solution to the Z13. It's connect the dots. Z13, 13 eyes, connect the dots. And meaning he was going to send out the Halloween card, which was going to reveal his identity. That was actually one of David Gold's better videos, when he also shows that the symbol that we've been talking about that has like the V, looks like a V and an F and an L put together, and it has the 4 dots. It actually is an M, and it's Frank Lee Moore's F, L, and M put together. Frank Lee Moore's one of his better videos. And Richard says he thinks it's just another victim count. Quite possibly. That might actually be the best answer, because the Zodiac seemed to keep this type of scorecard. But I think Richard Grinnell would even admit that who's to say that's actually true? I don't think that's true. I don't think the Zodiac killed 14 people. I have said from the beginning, I think the Zodiac was a liar, because sometimes he substantiated his claims. Sometimes he proved his claims. I'm the murderer of the taxi driver. Here's a piece of his bloody shirt. I killed the 2 kids on the 4th of July and the 2 kids at Lake Herman, or the 2 kids at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July. To prove that, I'll state some facts that only I and the police know. I thought anything else unsubstantiated. It's all lies. Oh yeah, I buried a bus bomb. Or I have a bomb that's buried somewhere. You have until the fall to dig it up. I was like, that's a lie. If nobody found the bomb didn't go off, and the Zodiac didn't reveal anything about the bomb. I was like, all fake. Whatever was a bomb, he's just trying to scare people. I could be wrong. And when you actually listen to the Zodiac Killer, he's saying things like, he buried a bomb and you have until the fall to dig it up, but he also says the bomb was a dud. I got swamped out by the rain we had a while back. Well, what do you think of that? Do you think that he's providing explanations why it didn't work? I've gone back and forth, and I was like, well, maybe I was too quick to dismiss all of his ideas, but as of now, I still stand by it. I think that the Zodiac was just lying about those threats. And Richard said he was definitely a liar. He falsely claimed Snoozy and Furlong. Perfect example. Now, some people dispute that. The Snoozy and Furlong murders were committed by Carl F. Warner, a serial killer whom I call the SFB killer, Snoozy, Furlong, and Billick. The third victim was Kathy Billick. And all the victims were stabbed numerous times. Snoozy and Furlong were stabbed 300 times in total. Kathy Billick was stabbed over 50 times, I believe. And I just don't think that was the Zodiac. Someone else was convicted. But people to this day believe that that was indeed the Zodiac, and they just convicted the wrong man. And yes, Richard says he insinuated that. Like, what Richard means is that when the Zodiac was updating his scorecard, it was right after the Snoozy and Furlong murders were committed in the Bay Area, and then he updated his killer scorecard by 2. Is that what you mean, Richard? And those were like the 2 homicides that had just taken place. But here's something else, though, and this was what I was reading about when I was looking into the death of Eric Selms, who died on January 1st of 1970, that 1969 had twice as many homicides as 1968 in the Bay Area. So it was just a particularly deadly year for the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's not all because of the Zodiac killer. It's because of other crimes like the Snoozy and Furlong murders. And who really knows about all the criminals that are going on there. But all right, I think this Halloween episode is going to be winding down. And you guys on the East Coast in America, I hope you have a good Halloween evening. Everybody stay safe. And to all of you who have kids out there trick-or-treating, I hope that you're able to get some extra large king-size candy bars and so on. I know people are going to be giving out the fun-size treats. Those were kind of fun, though. You know, I've been craving some of those blue Tootsie Pops so much. You see, I love Tootsie Rolls. I've been craving those for like a month, and I don't know why. Mr. JSC says full bars, amazing stuff. I love it. I mean, I loved Tootsie Pops as a kid. I was so on Blow Pops, and then those dum-dum things. I was like, those are good candies from the bank, but not necessarily for Halloween. I want some chocolate in the center. And Richard says, bye, Ned. Thanks for your effort. Hey, you too, Richard. We all love ZodiacCiphers.com. Well, almost all of us. I think you know what I mean. And as far as Halloween goes, hope you guys have a wonderful evening. You're going to see some great decorations. To those of you going to Halloween parties, hope you have a good time. And to those of you who tuned into this episode a little bit later, just thanks for spending Halloween with me. A little bit of Halloween discussion, a whole lot of things on the Zodiac. We had little bits of a discussion on outer space, which I love, and getting back into Making a Murderer. But Richard has a great idea for the future episodes on this channel, looking at one individual case for the deep dive, doing a deep dive on the live streams like the Lake Herman Road murders, Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and so on. And, Jerome says, I hope to have you soon on my channel. Anytime, Jerome, just message me on Facebook. I'll message you if you want to come on here, because Jerome has a lot of good ideas about the Kennedy assassination as well. And that is another one that I need to do more about, because I am just someone who has a very minimal understanding of the Kennedy assassination. I want to talk more about that story in the future. And I mean, there are going to be other true crime cases that I'll be discussing on the Thursday live streams. But as for now, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Happy Halloween to everybody. And, stay safe and have a good Halloween night, okay?